or I'm going to upload it in Canvas. The record tab is on. I'm going to start my presentation now. Hold on, I'll double check. Confirm. Can you confirm if the presentation can be seen? Use the chat. My screen, can it be seen? Okay, thank you. You asked the question, how does the century see genius? A big question to answer, but using one art movement in the modern century, we can illustrate how non-definitive and how the course of the creative genius has really shifted a lot. This is a combination of comics and panel art or canvas. Uh, the canvas is supposed to be the medium used for traditional painting. And in the traditional painting, the comic relief was never a staple subject. Roy Lichtenstein rivaled the canvases of the classics to include an amalgamation, to to use a more expressive term, amalgamation. Amalgamate is to mix two ideas, two disciplines that were not originally mixed, canvas and comics. Now, what is the subject matter of comics? Sometimes humorous, sometimes similar to graphic novels, very serious. And comics scholarship focus on the visual and the textual. This is the first stumbling block if you're going to study comics as an art form. You need to establish what area you are studying comics in. Is that the literary area or visual art area? Or will you do both, which is more extensive? We can refer to, for the sake of discussion, to the art of comic relief or comics book as an art form in itself, art form in itself. And let's try to explore the potential of this in the pop art culture. Pop art is a newer movement that rivaled the influence of abstract expressionism after World War II. Abstract expressionism was already a bigger force in Europe, and it has arrived, landed in New York. A lot of New York galleries opened up to exposition of abstract expressionism work. This is a famous work, famous for its use of pre-existing comic illustration and blowing it up into a big canvas. That's one thing to remember this. And famous on the second sense because it has stirred the still water of modern art. It has disturbed the gaining influence of abstract expressionism. Remember that abstract expressionism is not legible in terms of its emotional exposition. It uses a calligraphic style in rendering emotions. Here's a panel on emotion at the rightmost portion. This is the world of abstract expressionism art. Here's a panel on the left side, which features the subject matter of pop art. Again, the subject matter of pop art. Now, while abstract expressionism is dealing with emotion and has influenced so many followers, pop art is doing the backyard thing, is popularizing on exact images, representationalism, and then throwing it in the pop culture scene. Again, throwing it in the pop culture scene. It's the pop culture scene that will create an enormous force to propel this to popularity because a Starbucks paper cup matters a lot or is meaningful, so meaningful to people in the modern world. It defines their lifestyle. It defines the objects that they encounter every day. It, it is closest to them, and it evokes an intimate encounter as compared to the less legible and less direct exposition of the abstract expressionism art. On the rightmost portion panel, that's abstract expressionism. What does it tell you? What does it evoke? Well, first and foremost, it exudes colors that are flowing, melting down, flowing, and accompanied by lines, but these lines and colors do not conceive an apparent form. They exist as pure forms on the surface of the canvas, and you will be unsuccessful if you want to figure out a human form, an object that is present in reality. It is being interpreted by the artist on the canvas. You will be unsuccessful, but because it's not about representational art, it's about representing something beyond even the subconscious. Remember, in Romanticism, the project of artists is to use the subconscious feelings in order to evoke what? Mischief, for instance, or to evoke what is the desire of a person, even lust, L-U-S-T. Now this one does not deal solely on the subconscious, but it digs deeper to individualistic flow of emotion, the artist's signature of emotion while doing it in the studio. And right now you're recreating the moment as as he pressed on the brush and draw or perform the strokes with his brush with dabs of paint. It's reliving the moment of emotional torture, emotional turmoil, turbulence. It relives the moment when they translate probably the rhythm of their emotion as derived from the contemplation of their sadness onto the canvas. Well, look at this. At the middle, it's pop art. Sometimes people would comment that Roy Lichtenstein, the artist to the leftmost panel, is using graphic novel as a comment on the humor side of the comics world, or because of the stereotype that comics are always humorous. Roy Lichtenstein presented a series of pop art panels using emotional subject with a woman figure shedding a tear. The dots there is Roy Lichtenstein's clever representation of the mechanical production of the printing machine. It's called Ben-Day dots. It looks like a mesh if we describe it as a texture. So here, Roy Lichtenstein rivaling abstract expressionism, saying, hey, abstract expressionist artist, there's no quarrel among us, we're just the same. But this is in his rivalry mode. You know that artists will claim something, but inside of them, they're brewing their rivalry. Okay, we're comrades, but inside of me, I'm brewing my rivalry against you. But he told this to abstract expressionist artists. We're just the same. I'm using hard outlines, hard lines, bold lines, and you, abstract expressionism, I'm referring to the panel at the leftmost bottom part. That's the work of an expressionist artist. You're also using bold outlines to accompany your color combination and contrasting hues. Wow. My pop art uses bold outlines as well. The only thing that is different among us is I am legible, I am direct, I represent the object as it is in the reality, but you represent something denied of an actual form, representing something that is not immediate in the visceral. Probably the visceral reaction, the first visceral reaction to this is you're awestruck by how many lines would go in different directions. You're awestruck at how colors can lead to nowhere, how colors could look like a rainbow, but a little later it's not a rainbow anymore. You're awestruck and dumbfounded at something that is uncertain. But here, the popularity of pop art had been boosted by its fondness of ordinary objects. Let me just go back a little on the history of hard lines or the using of hard, bold outlines. Fauvism on the topmost left panel uses hard outlines in order to configure the subject matter, which is already textured thickly by the chromacity of the color palette that has been applied. And this color palette will never be toned down because Fauvism centered on wild and free application of colors. It is not restrained, meaning when you do not restrain the tonality, it will always be brilliant. It will always be vibrating on the surface of the canvas to the point that the brilliance and the vibrating effect would be too much for the eyes. Fauvism is a French art movement, and Fauvism came from beast-like as a terminology of the French derogatory term because it's wild and it's untamed. On the rightmost top panel, you have an example artwork coming from the medieval era. And if you look up individually closely on the form, organic form of human beings, you would see that they're configured using outline still. Not because in the medieval period, painterly effect was not discovered yet. Not because that their approach to art is lesser and more primitive. It's not about the discrepancy of skill in rendering. It's more on the norm of the period. Now, going back to the panel on the leftmost bottom, it's again a work of abstract expressionism. It's more on the expressive potential of color, expressive potential of line as line. But other than that, there's no more. On the rightmost lower panel, that's the work of Paleolithic period. Cave paintings are a good example of historical document that narrates how people observe their reality. There was a study that compared the accuracy of the depiction of modern painters with the accuracy of the depiction of ancient painters of the subject from nature, such as an animal, a boar, or a horse. The study has figured that the ancient people are more impeccably accurate in rendering organic forms compared to painters in the modern century. You can easily explain this result by saying that the two periods have different norms and approaches to art and rendering the subject, because in the ancient times, their way to or the purpose of illustrating was to capture how they remember the actual image of a boar, the actual image of a mammoth, the actual image of a horse. It's for illustrative purposes to instruct and communicate how our staple food look like, and at the same time to serve their animist culture of exalting enormous animals as God sent us as the protector of nature. Animist culture is based largely on illustrating because they are able to conceive what they mean in terms of exaltation, and they share it among them. This is the reason why the culture of painting is alive or was alive in ancient time, although they had no knowledge that they were creating something that is artistic. In the article, we can conclude two things: that this century approaches creative genius in number one, using appropriation, and number two, in using transcreation. Roy Lichtenstein, which was featured in that article, used appropriation because he used pre-existing comic illustration and transmuted it into the new visual form on a canvas or on a panel. It is an artistic appropriation with no intentional originality. So Immanuel Kant will raise his eyebrows on this material. Transcreation is a different expression. In transcreation, you lift up a material or an art form and translate it into another art form sensed in a different way. Music, for instance, being translated into visual form. Boogie music, the rhythm of the boogie music translated into a painting. Can you imagine the jittery and the jumpy rhythm of boogie music? It's a Southern American music being translated into a painting. We can only we can only think of colors now, alternating red, blue, yellow, red, blue, yellow, just to copy or approximate the movement or the actual rhythmic movement that exists in a musical form. So from form to form, that's transcreation. You can also transcreate, and this is more normal in cinematography. You can translate a script into a motion picture, and that's transcreation. Appropriation again is you're using pre-existing artwork, then you're going to transcreate it in a new art form. Perhaps number one, using new media, or number two, using new context. And since I mentioned context, I'd like to use this example of Mona Lisa with a smartphone. Mona Lisa with a smartphone is context in the 21st century. The girl with the pearl earrings is context in the 21st century. By examining their gesture and posture, this girl with the pearl earrings is looking out to the camera or the photographer waiting for her picture to be taken. Why are we able to say so? Because this gesture is readying, is actually the an indicator that he is posing in front of a camera. What about the scream? The scream is a pre-existing subject matter, and usually the scream is transcreated into the pathological symptoms of the 21st century when an individual is isolated and has a lot of fear. When an individual is anxious, he is now the scream image. He becomes the scream image, screaming out as a manifestation of all of these facets of emotions that are brewing internally. Mona Lisa looks good. The girl with the pearl earrings looks good. But in the context of the past, I don't think that somebody would like Mona Lisa to be transcreated in this manner. We live in different norms context. It is safe to paradise today, but how about in the past? You will be lambasted, you will be tortured, you will be charged with criminal charges, perhaps for doing or for not protecting the integrity or by insulting the integrity of a particular important cultural artifact. Culturalists will really protest. I'd like to give one more case before I move on to the next slide. Photographers who are hired to do a very unique prenuptials. I'd like to cite specifically cultural appropriation. Now, if you have a couple standing by at the backdrop, you have indigenous tribe lining up to serve as a background for their moment of kissing, for instance. That's a cultural appropriation. It's no longer a painting that you are transcreating, but it's a real culture, a live culture with live individuals that you want to transcreate into a photograph. So culturalists will become protective of the integrity of culture. So they will vehemently oppose appropriating indigenous tribe in a photographic composition. It somehow reduced them into compositional elements that is just staying there because you want your prenuptial to be unique. In the art world, we cannot fault the artist, by the way, but we have a society to serve. We do not say that art will always serve the society no matter what. Sometimes art can be self-centered. I tell you, sometimes art is about self-centeredness and individuated expressions. Mauna nga nahimo ng abstract expressionism. It's not the general emotional expression of people, of commoners. It's the expression particular to the moment of, of, of the artist in his episodic encounter with sadness, his episodic encounter with happiness. It's particular to what is happening to him, and we are just peeking into that shell of experience coming from the artist. Lichtenstein did not really criticize representationalism of the past, and he did not at the same time celebrate or over promote and over exalt the abstract, the non-representational, non-figurative approach of the modern art. Can we say that he was a fence sitter, sitting at the middle, being neutral? No, it's more, he explained this by referring to his experience or the process of creation, that there is a time when his project would call out for representationalism. And there is a time that his project, without his control, would move towards non-representational. It's more of a gut feeling inside of the artist. It's more on the intuitiveness of the artist that he is responding to. It's not just about delineating the representationalism of the past and the non-representationalism of the modern. It's listening to both, according to Lichtenstein. And at the right moment, you can convey one or the other. Here's another Lichtenstein's work. I can see the whole room and there's nobody in it. It's a work of creative genius because, for one, we are being convinced by Lichtenstein that we as an audience are actually inside the dark room and we are being looked in on by the peeker or the subject there. The subject does not see us because it's too dark. That's the cleverness. If you're going to focus your judgment of creative genius on cleverness, it's more objective because you're looking at dexterity and skill. You're looking at the ability of the person to create an instance of something. While in greatness, it's more on implicit. Uh, sorry, not implicit. It's more on internal trait. Michael Jackson, for instance, was considered as a great artist. And by equal terms, we can say artistic genius. And the reason is not just because he has an enormous following, but because internally, he has influenced the visual culture enormously because of his intimacy with his music made through lyrics and conjoined through performances and dance shows. So he became unforgettable. He was exalted, and he is continually being exalted as a great musician or a great artist. If you have a stellar background, you will become, for example, a national artist. Now, most of the national artists are being judged not just by their cleverness, not just by objective measure, but how they influence the society through, for instance, how they influence the entire art world through beefing up the the Filipino artistry with his experience abroad, for instance, with his influence across regions, for instance. His biography becomes the biography of the nation once he is hailed as a national artist. Once you are everywhere and it reflects on your background, somebody writes about you and set it in a document, and you are discovered, and people will look up at you as great. But without discovery, without siguro without influence on the the internal, or the non-corporeal aspect of a culture, you will never be called as great. There are a lot of people who have experienced fame and fortune, but they were never considered as great. People who had a lot of following but never considered as great because this factor is missing, how they influenced a culture. Happy na tamahuman to two slides more. On the primary center, you have the creative genius working as a slave. On the upper leftmost portion, you have creative geniuses working in a guild of artists guided by the master craftsman who, under his tutelage, would train all of these guildsmen into master artists so that they can produce and earn money from their produce. And this one is Michelangelo, who was hailed as Il Divino because he claimed that he was ordained by God to create the Sistine Chapel ceiling, for instance. He's inspired. Whatever greatness that he's got in his work and in his skill was inspired, divinely inspired. And you know why this had stayed on, this reputation, this moniker of being the Il Divino? It's because people validated it during his time. People nodded to his claim. And it's because of the enormous influence that his friends had gotten him into. Um, the influence of money and power. The Medici family. Remember that the Medici family also produced popes in their kin. And these popes commissioned Michelangelo as the the artist par excellence who will be devoted to the creation of statues in the tomb, in the future tomb of the Pope, and all of the paintings that will serve as a testament to the dogma of the Catholic Church. With that status, he was not a slave. He was not a commoner, but he was sitting and sharing supper with owners of banks, with powerful political figures, and with religious figures. He was not a beggar. He was not a busker. He earned money because people believed that he was divinely inspired. That was the type of creative genius that he possessed. How about today's creative genius? We don't have that Il Divino anymore today. We haven't hailed anyone of equal stature as Michelangelo, but we are aware that people can be clever and people can be great through influence. We are aware that people can be clever, that they can create a contentless subject matter. We believe in the cleverness of an artist to turn art upside down and perform out of nothingness and still come up with something artistic. Like this is supposed to be nothing. With the inscription of Armat, that's an endorsement, that is an artwork. But look how far it has gone. It's in every history book. It's nothing. The concept is nothing. The idea, nothing. Production, nothing. But it has been hailed as a creative or a work of a creative genius. So why and how come? Because today, it's very fluid, class. Our idea of creative genius is fluid. documentation plus parody in in the work of Roy Lichtenstein. He documented the atrocities of World War II, and he parodized it in his canvas. Two things in one artwork for for the century that we live in is a work of a creative genius. Remember how monocular people were and artists were in the classics? One expression, one subject. Industrial, if you're able to transform a very ordinary material into an extraordinary one, we hail you as a creative genius. If you're most influential, if you're an artist using indie music as your medium of expression, indie music, people listen to you and you have great following. If you have that influence and other indie artists do not have that influence, by mere comparison, you will be hailed as a creative genius. It's indeed true that a lot of indie artists are not successful, but there are a handful of, indie artists that had made it even to the popular scene. The use of non-art materials. Some non-art materials are deformed. They're not structured to be immediately artistic, but it takes a creative genius to transform ugly materials into beautiful subject matter. Another case, there's one photographer who took an extreme selfie, and in a magazine, he was hailed as a creative genius. What did he take? What type of selfie did he take? It was an extreme selfie. He was up on the edge of the Christ the Redeemer arm. He took a selfie. He called it extreme selfie on 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 top and near the edge of that arm of Christ the Redeemer statue in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. He was featured. Wow, an extreme selfie. People with creative ideas may sometimes be near the creative genius status, turning something ordinary, as I said, into extraordinary. I'm done now. I'd like to end with this with this case study from a sociologist to see to it how people react to creative genius. There were two performances held in different locations. There were two singers performing in these locations. One is a subway, one is an auditorium. They were performing the same piece, and they have been examined to be having the same musicality, having the same skill in singing. They're on the same genre even. Singer A in the subway had attracted only a few crowd members, a handful, and you can count them off. While singer B in the auditorium, he was jam-packed. I mean, his auditorium space was jam-packed with a bigger crowd, and was able to fill beyond half of the space of the auditorium without inviting everyone. The only tactic was to install a loudspeaker outside of the auditorium so that when he starts singing, people will know that there is a performance happening inside, and people will be attracted to the performance. There was no fee, nor a ticket or entrance fee to pay. People just freely went inside. What happened to the singer on the subway? He was a known artist, and in ordinary days, he would have filled a space as large as a terminal. But at that time, only if you listened to him. This time, Aristotle can explain things the classic way. He says that anything we do, we possess three things to persuade: ethos, pathos, and logos, or in the proper order, logos, ethos, pathos. What is the singer's logos? If you're able to transmit your musicality and be understood by the people, that sense of connection is already a validation of your logos. people understand you. Your credibility is if you have recorded something in a recording studio, if you have performed in a concert, if you have a training in music, or as a performer. That's your ethos. The credibility will rise up. What's your pathos? Emotional appeal. That's pathos. Your ability to use your own style in order to be in, in order to enter the the condition or the vulnerability of an audience member. It's like you're singing to him or her individually. It's your ability to probably understand the condition of your listeners. And then you emotionally appeal to them using your expressiveness, however you do that in singing. Let's use this convincing power of a singer to explain what happened to the singer in the subway station. His credibility was not supported by an institution because he was detached from what? The ideal singing environment. There's no problem with the singer singing in the auditorium because he is in an institution that is meant for performance, and his credibility will shoot upwards. And the credibility in comparison of the singer singing in the subway will go down because this is a social marker, even a status marker. And look at how people will judge this. Furthermore, in this study, creative genius was more attributed to the person singing in to the singer singing in the auditorium than to the person singing in the subway station. Although they're singing in the same style, in the same manner, singing the same musical piece, the singer in the auditorium was more favorably appraised. Maybe because this is again the fluidity of creative genius concept. Or maybe the society is really looking into institutionalism in art, that somebody should be the censor to allow people to say that your art is good, to lead people to say that your art is good and can be listened to by anyone. When you're detached from your institution, for instance, if I hold classes at the park, at the theme park, probably I will not be able to establish my credibility. It helps that I am in an institution. Sometimes here's the perception: if you're at home and you hear the chorus of the the fish vendor barking his salesmanship uh, skit script, and here comes chickens in the background, roasters in the background. If I have all this in the environment, I am also reducing my credibility. That is the kind of experience that the singer experienced in the subway station. It's a matter, DI, of institution when we speak of establishing the creative genius today. And Aristotle is still relevant because he was the one who categorized this persuasive ability of a communicator and of an artist: logos, ethos, and pathos. I am done with my discussion. What do you think of, very quickly now, what do you think of the artist of today? Mm, rephrase, what do you think of the creative genius of today?